It's not an accident that a culture is producing media that celebrates the ugly and the anti-Christian and the grotesque and the perverse. This is deliberate. They work on a strategy of corrupt and conquer, basically. And so, yes, there's no doubt. To me, the biggest battles we've got in the world today, it's communism versus Christianity. It's the godless globalist agenda versus faith and family and the future.
Hey everybody, Alex Newman here with The New American, and today we have a very, very special guest with us. His name is Dr. Peter Hammond. I've been a huge fan of his ministry and his work for many years. He's like a movie character almost. He's like a James Bond. He loads up a truck full of Bibles and drives across Africa and takes them to a war zone. And I thought it was pretty wild. The Sudanese government had a order to kill him if they ever caught him. I mean, it's just incredible adventures and stories, and he does it all for the Lord. He is the head of Frontline Fellowship, which is his ministry based in Cape Town, South Africa, and he knows so much about so much. I mean, you can talk to him about communism, the establishment, Marxism, the Bible, and he knows it all. Dr. Hammond, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's good to be with you. Thank you, Alex.
So, Dr. Hammond, to start off with, tell us a little bit about what's happening in South Africa right now and in broader Africa. What's the status when it comes to missions and spreading the gospel and getting Bibles out? And also, what's the political situation like down there? Is it still relatively free to operate? What are some of the difficulties you guys are experiencing right now?
Well, 2020's lockdown lunacy, absolutely insane. We have been unable to cross borders. We've been locked down so many ways. The African National Congress took this lockdown from Wuhan so seriously. They mobilized the army, imposed a curfew, and shot people to prevent them from catching COVID-19, which was very thoughtful of them. And in fact, more people were dying of the curfew and being shot by the police and the army than were dying of the disease. So I'm sure that really met some quotas with the Chinese Communist Party. They must have been thrilled that they'd taken their model of how to deal with the virus. You send people into the streets with assault rifles and shoot the people because they're not indoors, because you're concerned about their health. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the mentality out here. We have a communist government in the African National Congress who are following an insane economic suicide policy of what they call expropriation without compensation. It's the same thing as dekulakization under Stalin and Lenin in the Soviet Union, the great cultural revolution of Mao Zedong in China. This is the second phase of the revolution. So right now we're living in the second phase of the revolution. Just this last weekend, yesterday, we were involved in a march to Parliament, hundreds of farmers. We marched to protest about the government's policy of wanting to steal our land, demonize the farmers, and murdering and torturing farmers. This is a low-level terrorist campaign. We have lost more farmers in the last 26 years of farm terrorism, murder under the ANC, than we lost soldiers in our 26 years of war fighting the Cubans and Soviets in Angola and Southwest Africa. In fact, we lost 650 soldiers killed in action in 26 years of war. We've lost over 3,500 farmers tortured to death in the last 26 years of peace. And murders in this country, if you take the whole population as a whole, is 22,000 a year. 22,000 people murdered a year. Now, that's more than all the soldiers who died in the South African Army in the First and Second World War combined. We lost almost 10,000 soldiers in the Second World War. We lost 12,000 soldiers in the First World War. So we lose 22,000 people murdered every year. That's equal to our World War losses over a period of 10 and a half years, if you take the First and Second World War together. So it's absolutely insane. Right now, the most dangerous occupation in the world is to be a white commercial farmer in South Africa. So the situation is quite serious. It's desperate. We live in condition orange. The whole time we're armed, we're ready, we're alert. Every single day we can be attacked. Our homes need to be like fortresses. And well, you've lived in South Africa. You know something about what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I think it's gotten significantly worse since I was there, which is a shame. And so, Peter, what is What's the deal with the communist Chinese? A few years ago, I read an ANC foreign policy document where they called communist China, and I quote here, the guiding lodestar of our struggle. And yet, there's, I think, a lot of people in the West, including in the governments, who think, oh, South Africa, it's just a normal, advanced country. And in this document, they were calling for a new world order, a post-Western world order. Are they really splitting away from kind of Western values and moving more toward communist Chinese and Marxist values? What does that mean? And what does the future hold for South Africa if this continues?
Sadly so. You're quite right. In fact, the ANC government, the ANC stands for abortion, necklacing communism, or is it abortion, atheism, nepotism, corruption, something like that. Anyway, the ANC, they're the ruling party in this country, and they love Red China. Red China, them are so they're completely in bed together. To such an extent, we have Red Chinese warships coming to harbor. We have Red China involved in so much of the economy. And right now, it is believed that the Chinese Communist Party run government in China are behind the expropriation and compensation plans for our farms, because the Chinese want to come in and loot Africa. All over Africa, we see them coming and they're just stripping our forests bare. They are, whatever the minerals they are, whether it is platinum, uranium, cobalt, diamonds, of course, everything like that, they strip it bare. In Zimbabwe, they have built a massive not just a runway, airstrip, airways at Morang Diamond Field. So Antonov 126 is coming from China. They land, they don't go through customs, don't go through the capital city, Harare. They land the Morang Diamond Fields, load up the diamonds, fly straight back to China. They pick up ivory, they pick up rhino horn, all things that are completely banned, sites and so on. You're not allowed to be trading in rhino horn, elephant tusks. Doesn't matter. They go straight back to China, and they are stripping Africa bare of its minerals. And in exchange, they give tyrants and dictators tanks and helicopter gunships and jet aircraft and things to suppress their population. They build them palaces, they build maybe a soccer stadium or air terminal that they want, but the people on the ground get nothing. The people of Zimbabwe have yet to benefit from the largest diamond production mine in the world at this time, the Morang Diamond Fields, because it all goes to the ZANU-PF government in Zimbabwe or to the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. So in South Africa, a lot of the farms in South Africa are believed to be over some pretty good land that maybe they could strip mine and get some minerals that they're after. Now, of course, that would lead to starvation, but obviously starving a few million people is not too serious in the scheme of the greater good for the globalist communist cause in China. So since 2.5 years ago, President Ramaphosa of South Africa, the ANC president, has announced expropriation without compensation as a government policy to take the South African farms. And of course, these farmers are feeding the whole country. Let me back up a little. Back in 1994, when Nelson Mandela became president, we had 70,000 white commercial farmers who were feeding 100 million people. 70,000 farmers feeding 100 million people. And South Africa's population in 1994 was 28 million. Today, our population is more than doubled. We have 60 million people. A number of farmers has much more than halved. We're down to under 30,000 farmers who are feeding 40 million people. But we're now 60 million. So that means South Africa is now a net food importer. Our farmers can't feed our whole population, nor can we feed our neighbors who we used to feed throughout southern and central Africa. So the situation you would have thought is drastic. And yet in this environment where we are losing food security, and remember, we're in a continent with a lot of starvation, and South Africa has been the greatest food producer in all of Africa for decades, and now they're about to confiscate the farms, which you know how that went in Zimbabwe when they took the 5,600 farms from the Zimbabwe white commercial farmers. Zimbabwe was then starving and needed vast amounts of American food aid and so on. And more than half the population of Zimbabwe has fled across the border because they can't even find food, let alone work in Zimbabwe. So that's the situation we're in. Red China is willing to sacrifice their food security in order to get access to strip mine the farming areas. And the Southern government's willing to do it because Red China gives them a lot of money to bail out their debts.
Yeah, it's fascinating what the parallels between what happened in the former Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, which you have some experience with, and also what's happening now in South Africa, and of course the involvement of hostile foreign communist powers. I want to shift gears a little bit now. I know your primary focus is missions and getting the gospel out. So first of all, how should a Christian look at communism? How should a Christian look at globalism? How should a Christian see what's happening in the world and in Africa today? And how should they react to it? And also, what is the progress? We hear a lot of reports here in America that the gospel is spreading across Africa, that people are being saved, that people are being discipled, and things are changing. What's your experience? Is the gospel really, really taking root in Africa? What's the status with that?
It is, definitely. I've been a missionary now for over 40 years, and I've worked in 38 countries. I've been involved as a missionary in 8 wars, and I've lived through 3 revolutions. I was brought up in Rhodesia, and so for me, it was very normal from the time, as far back as I can remember, from time I was 6. I remember the first time I'm on a farm in Rhodesia, and every farmer's armed, and the farmers' wives got a submachine gun 9mm over their shoulder on a sling, and maybe a revolver on their hip, and whether they're shopping or whether they in the fields, wherever, hanging up the washing, they're always armed, and everyone is armed, and the school teachers were armed. And when we went on school outings, there could be ambushes, there could be landmines in the road, and we would, as part of our schooling, be taken off to a game reserve once a year. That was my favorite time of the year, when we'd be taught tracking, anti-tracking, bush survival skills. It was absolutely tremendous being brought up in Rhodesia. And I must say that I felt sorry for these poor kids brought up in boring America and Britain, because I was brought up in a country of wild animals, and I could walk outside my town as a 12-year-old and see wildebeest and rhino and giraffe, and I had a lion as a pet and a bush baby. And so for me, being brought up in a country like Rhodesia was just an absolute paradise. And even though we were a country at war, I felt safer in Rhodesia during the war than I feel in South Africa today, in the ANC-controlled situation. So there's no doubt that we in Rhodesia were a bastion of civilization, of sanctity, and of sanity in an insane world. We were surrounded by the communists on more than 80% of our borders, and we were having communist terrorists coming in from Zambia, from Mozambique, and even from Botswana. And we had one bridge and one railway line, one road link into South Africa, which is the only lifeline for Rhodesia. Rhodesia was a country under siege. And we won all our battles. We were never beaten by our enemies. We were betrayed by our friends. That was what Ian Smith, the Prime Minister of Rhodesia, said. And the Rhodesian army won all its battles, never lost a skirmish, and yet was betrayed by the British Foreign Office, by the Commonwealth, by the United Nations, not just fought by the Soviet Union, but betrayed by the US State Department. It was hideous. The role of Kissinger and Jimmy Carter and Andrew Young, remember those characters, what dastardly deed they did. And so as a youngster, I saw paradise turned into perdition, heaven turned into hell, a breadbasket turned into a basket case. And I remember I was only 16 years old in 1976 when Jimmy Carter was elected. And I remember the absolute pale of doom that came over us. And there was this absolute mourning across the nation, because we knew this meant our country is probably doomed. We were fighting an all-out war, surrounded, outnumbered. There were more terrorists than there were security forces. They were better armed. We were under total sanctions. We were so sanctioned. Now, bear in mind, Rhodesians had fought with the Americans and the British in the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War, the Malayan conflict. We had been allies. And when our back was against the wall, our friends not only sanctioned us economically, but banned us from the Olympic Games, even the Paraplegics Olympics. The pettiness and the cultural sanctions, everything that was put on Rhodesia, it was extraordinary. And yet our little country stood firm. We fought. But when Jimmy Carter was elected, I remember the sense of, and I don't know how many Americans think, your elections, your presidential elections, can greatly affect the life of the persecuted church and the lives and deaths of Christians overseas, especially in Africa and the Middle East and Asia. And when Jimmy Carter was elected, we knew, I mean, even a 16-year-old at school, I knew that Jimmy Carter had a high priority to betray Rhodesia into the hands of the communist terrorists, just like he had a high priority to betray the Shah of Iran's Persia into the hands of the Ayatollahs. And you got rid of Jimmy Carter 40 years ago, but the people of Zimbabwe are still stuck with the foreign policy legacy of Jimmy Carter. So, yes, I've ministered to persecuted church all over Africa, and I must say Millions of people in Africa are dead now, in Mozambique, in Angola, Zimbabwe, all over Africa, as a direct result of Jimmy Carter's foreign policies from the election 44 years ago.
A friend gave me Prime Minister Ian Smith's autobiography, The Great Betrayal, and I kind of had some nebulous conception of the role of Kissinger and Carter, and I think Ian Smith, even up to the end, kind of wanted to give Kissinger the benefit of the doubt, but the betrayal of the black and the white people of Rhodesia was just so grotesque, and I think your average American has no understanding of that. And you mentioned U.S. foreign policy and the persecution of the church. That was actually what inspired me this time to get in touch with you and to bring you on the program. I wrote an article some years ago, back in I think 2012, about how U.S. foreign policy, it just seemed almost like designed to stimulate the persecution of Christians. We saw it in Iraq, we were seeing it in Libya, we were seeing it in Syria, we saw it in the Ivory Coast, we saw it in Afghanistan, we saw it in Egypt. And what do you think's going on there? Why does it seem? And I think with Trump, things have changed a little bit in U.S. government, certainly in U.S. foreign policy. But why has there been this link between U.S. government meddling overseas and the apparent increase in the persecution of the church? And what is in the role of an American Christian? You know, we have some Christians who don't even vote. They think, we're just going to be raptured any time, and that'll be nice. What should American Christians be thinking about this, and what should they be doing about this in terms of having good government here at home, but also helping our persecuted brothers and sisters in other parts of the world?
Yes, indeed. In fact, I must say that I was a soldier in training in 1980 when Ronald Reagan was elected. But even though I was just a 20-year-old, I knew that this meant a lot of good things. Ronald Reagan was going to change things. He planned to put freedom on the offensive. He was anti-communist. He had a good track record of exposing communism. And so we were delighted. And I remember from 1980 on, just seeing a real rollback. In fact, freedom was on the offensive. And we won a lot of battles in Angola against the Soviets, the Cubans, the Marxists in Angola, and the Southern Defense Force was on a roll. And we know Ronald Reagan was supporting solidarity in Poland and the freedom fighters of Afghanistan and Nicaragua, and also in Angola. So I was a missionary in Angola, for example, in 1986, and we'd been bombed, we'd been strafed, we had dirt all over us, we had bits of tree bark down our necks, still trying to get out. And at night, after a day of being strafed and bombed and rocketed by the Soviet Air Force in Angola, we were gathered around a campfire. Fortunately, they didn't have night fighting capabilities at that stage. And we were listening to shortwave radio, Radio Free America, Voice of America. And as we were listening to this on shortwave radio around the campfire, on came Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan was saying, we are going to send Stinger missiles to the freedom fighters of UNITA in Angola. It was like watching a Star Wars movie and they start talking to you personally. So it was, what? He knows about us. He cares about us. Here we were in Kawando Kabanga province, the uttermost part of, right at the edge of civilization. And Ronald Reagan was talking about our most perceived need, Stinger missiles, anti-aircraft weapons. And after a long silence, one of our people said, well, that would be nice. Will they do it? And in fact, they did. We saw the Stinger missiles came in. I've got some lovely pictures in my album of MiG-21s and MiG-23s on the ground taken down by Stingers, hind helicopter gunship totally disintegrated on the ground. And I wrote an article after Ronald Reagan passed away, Ronald Reagan saved lives in Angola. And I've put on there on our Frontline missionary.org website pictures of some US taxpayers' money having done something good for a change, having actually funded the good guys against the bad guys. Now that makes a change, because US foreign policy has funded a lot of communist terrorists and radical jihadists and ISIS and so on. But in the days of Ronald Reagan, I could see freedom put in the offensive, the good guys were winning, and it ended up with the Berlin Wall coming down and countries being freed. 13 countries were betrayed to communism under the 4 years of Jimmy Carter, but not one country fell to communism under 8 years of Ronald Reagan. And in fact, many countries started to be freed from communism afterwards. So there's no doubt, I wish American voters would think foreign policy implications when they think of what to do, whether to vote, how to vote, who to vote for, because there's not a shadow of a doubt in my mind. There are millions of Christians in Africa dead today because of Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton's, Barack Hussein Obama's foreign policies. But there are people alive today because of Ronald Reagan's policies. And actually, I could say a few things also about how Trump's policies have saved lives in Sudan over the last 4 years, which has been quite extraordinary.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit about Sudan. I know they have a new government there, and I know they just signed a peace treaty with Israel. These are big changes, and I think your average American really doesn't have much idea about what's going on in Sudan. I know the previous government, they put on their website that if you were found in the borders of Sudan, they would shoot you dead, and of course you went back anyway. Tell us a little bit about that. Give us some background. I know the church there was ruthlessly persecuted. You have ancient Christian communities that have been there, almost 2,000 years, being ruthlessly persecuted by Islamists, and now suddenly something different. So tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Yes, so Sudan has been my primary mission field going for the last 25 years, and absolutely extraordinary experience. Yes, it goes back to Acts chapter 8 and the Ethiopian eunuch and the Bible coming back in the book of Isaiah to Sudan right then. So since the first century, there's been a strong Christian church in Sudan, heavily persecuted. So I got involved back in 1995 in Sudan, and the situation was hideous, absolutely grotesque. Scorched earth, terror bombings, systematic persecution, tortures, Arabization, Islamization, persecuted Christian black minority in South Sudan. Well, there were the majority in South Sudan, but the minority in the whole country. And so we smuggled in Bibles. I got shot at, bombed, rocketed, strafed. We came under aerial bombardment at church services, rocketed in church services, and so on. And our teams came under helicopter gunship attack. And I've documented this in Faith and Defiance Sudan book, which gone through 3 editions, and brought in film crews like Pat Matriciano, Jeremiah Films. We did Sudan, the Hidden Holocaust, Terrorism, Persecution, and a whole bunch of other great films exposing the Islamic jihad against Christians in South Sudan. And the situation was really, really serious. And I remember in 1996, I didn't know the results of the American elections. That was November 1996. And I was flying from Kenya into Sudan. And as I landed and I came out the plane, the governor's response let me know what the result of the 96 elections was. He walked towards me and his first words to me, this is the resistance movement governor of Equatoria province. How could the Americans elect Clinton again? And my heart fell. And everyone was grieving because he knew this meant a lot more lives are going to be lost. You know, Bill Clinton couldn't care about Christians getting murdered in the Middle East, and in fact was aiding and abetting the enemy in so many ways and so many useless, irresponsible things. For example, you'll recall that back in 98, was it, the US embassy was bombed in both Nairobi and in Dar es Salaam. And in retaliation, the Americans sent a whole lot of cruise missiles into Khartoum, a pharmaceutical place, and some place which might have been training terrorists in and around Khartoum in Sudan. And as a response to that, the jihadists bombed Planet Hollywood in Cape Town, my town, Cape Town, in the waterfront. So 1998, my wife and I and our children were at the waterfront shortly after this bombing. And, you know, we saw the debris and the chaos and the police and the ambulances and everything at Planet Hollywood, you know, where we took our children to walk. And we walked past that Planet Hollywood a few times. We even went in there. And so because America was meddling in the Middle East and playing the fool with a whole lot of nonsense there, which wasn't helping, next thing we know, Americans are dying and Kenyans and Tanzanians are dying. And then so some poor British tourist in Cape Town gets his legs blown off at Planet Hollywood in retaliation to something Clinton had done over in Sudan. And it just shows that these things know no borders. When you get governments meddling all over the place, especially in these powder kegs like the Middle East, how many innocent people die as a result? So we got a lot of bombing. In fact, my mission station in Sudan, we got bombed 10 times in the next year. The church that we were serving got another 10 aerial bombardments. The hospital that Franklin Graham got set up at Loy, which we helped him set up, they got bombed over 10 times as well. And as I was writing Faith and Defiance Sudan, the government of Sudan put on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website an article, Why Churches in Sudan Are Not Bombed. And on it, it had in it a threat to me saying Peter Hammond should expect to be bombed every time he comes to Sudan. He should expect to be shot on sight. And they even gave the reason. They said, because his writings make him an enemy of the state. So there you have it. The Sudan government were a bunch of peaceful Democrats. They'd never hurt anyone. They wouldn't bomb churches, but they'd make an exception in my case because I documented how they bombed churches and hospitals. So to prove that they were peaceful and tolerant and didn't bomb people, they were threatening my life with bombing and shooting for having published this. So, okay, I'm sure that makes sense to a Democrat somewhere, maybe. But in Sudan, we were facing scorched earth, genocide, absolutely hideous. But it got worse and worse and worse under Barack Hussein Obama. And do you know, 3 years ago, we went to the Nuba Mountains of Sudan, which is an island of Christianity and a sea of Islam. And as we got there, things were peaceful. And we were quite surprised. And our people were able to take in a lot of Bibles. And next year we took in 100,000 Bibles. And next year we took in 110. Next year we took in another 120,000. We've taken the last 3.5 years over 350,000 Bibles and books into the Nuba Mountains of South Kordofan in Sudan, Islamic Sudan. Totally illegal. But it's only because the peace treaty right now and a ceasefire. And I never read about this anywhere in the Western world. You don't hear about this on CNN, that's for sure. But apparently, the people told me on the ground in Sudan that Donald Trump immediately came to power, made a deal with the people of Sudan, the art of the deal. He said, I know what you want, an end to economic sanctions. I'll tell you what I want. 12 months, no bombing, no aerial bombardments to South Kordofan, Nuba Mountains, Blue Nile, or Darfur, where there were wars waging. And after 12 months of no bombings in those areas and no ground offensives, no hostile actions, America lifted sanctions on Sudan. And since then, there's been peace. And now they've got Omar al-Bashir, the dictator of Sudan for nearly 30 years, who's wanted for genocide in The Hague. He's on trial for corruption, other things in Sudan. And they've got some kind of transitional government, civilians and military civilian government. They have taken away the apostasy laws, which put Muslims to death for converting to Christianity. They've gotten rid of the blasphemy laws, under which many Christians had been stoned to death for saying something that might upset Muslim. And they are now talking about religious freedom. It's astounding. So I think this is a major news item. It just shows how so many people died because of Barack Hussein Obama setting up ISIS, launching the whole Arab Spring, destabilizing stable American allies like Egypt and stable countries like Syria and even Libya, and stampeding tens of millions of Muslims into this human tsunami into Europe, which has caused further ripple effect destabilizations, and all the chaos caused. You know that even Ambassador Stevens, before he was ambassador, I'm talking about the Ambassador Stevens who was murdered in Benghazi in 2013, the one that Hillary Clinton said, what difference does it make? That one. Right. He was the bagman who took $500 million to get ISIS started. And ISIS, it's been testified even before your Congress by a U.S. general that the U.S. military and CIA set up ISIS and bankrolled them as a launching pad to destabilize Syria. And yet Syria is a secular state that allows religious freedom under Assad. But by supporting ISIS and al-Nusra Front, who are al-Qaeda affiliates, this looks absolutely insane. So I don't know how many Americans realize how their governments, and I'm talking about from Woodrow Wilson through FDR, through Jimmy Carter onwards, have been meddling and not making the world a better, safer place, but betraying people in the hands of Marxist mass murderers from the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, Yalta Agreement, all the way through to what's been going on in recent times, like this insane war on Syria, which I know missionaries in Syria and I know Christians in Syria, pastors who all say, we all support Assad because we know he's the only thing standing between us and getting our heads chopped off by ISIS. And we don't understand why is NATO and the CIA and the US government supporting the terrorists, the same terrorists who are meant to have been attacking America, and they're supporting these terrorists in Syria. How can terrorism be wrong in America but right in Syria? And so my friends in Syria are telling me that our people are on the wrong side when it comes to the war in Syria, for example.
Yeah, we've covered that very extensively too. I mean, there's official documents. We've got a 2012 memo from the Defense Intelligence Agency where the Obama administration admitted they were supporting the Syrian revolution. It was led by al-Qaeda, and hey, we want to set up a Salafist principality in eastern Syria. Boom, there's ISIS. So it's it's very real, and I think most Americans are just clueless about this. In the last few minutes we have left, Peter, a lot of these Marxist doctrines have actually been creeping into the church in the United States. I'm sure the same is true in South Africa. Now we've got pastors of even supposedly conservative churches doing a social justice and critical race theory and all this. Um, what is the distinction between Marxism and Christianity? I think there's even an effort to fuse them now. And how should Christians deal with communism as Christians, as citizens? I mean, is this a place for the church to be active? What is the role of the Christian? What is the role of the church in standing against tyranny, totalitarianism, communism, Marxism, and all the rest?
Yes, there's no doubt in my mind, having been a missionary to persecuted church for nearly 40 years now, and having worked in 38 countries and seen the persecuted church on the other side. And I've got many friends from the persecuted church, all the way from Poland through Romania, Albania, Bulgaria, back behind the Iron Curtain in those days in the 80s, all the way through Mozambique, Angola, the Congo, Zimbabwe. And there's no doubt in my mind, communism is antichrist. Communism is so anti-Christian, it is beyond belief that there are people so gullible as to think that you can merge or in any way find compatibility between communism and Christianity. Karl Marx, the founder of communism, in his writings makes it crystal clear he was a Satanist. He wasn't just an occultist, he was a Satanist. And you just have to read the writings of Karl Marx. And Richard Wurmbrand wrote the excellent book Marx and Satan, where he documents without a shadow of a doubt Karl Marx's whole motivations was destruction, hatred, antichrist. The slogan of the Soviet Union under Vladimir Lenin is, we fight against God to snatch believers from him, and let us drive the capitalists from the earth and God from heaven. And it was put so well by Alexander Solzhenitsyn: the world has never known a godlessness so malicious, so organized, so tenaciously evil as that in modern communism, the Soviet Union. And he said, its economic pretensions and its political ideological pretensions are side issues. The real central pivot of communism is its atheistic, godless, anti-Christian hatred. Hatred for God is not merely a side effect, it's a central pivot of communism. And so for a Christian to in any way find liberation theology, which is nothing but Marxism in a Christian disguise, or critical race theory, which is the Frankfurt School of Marxism, or any of these Marcusian ideas, the termite strategy of Antonio Gramsci, these are Marxist ideologies at their essence. So the social justice warriors, to give them the name they want to use, or progressives within the evangelical church, they are Marxist stooges. They are useful idiots, to use the term of Vladimir Lenin. And I know many of these people, and it's extraordinary. Whether you're talking about the Tim Kellers of this world or whatever, everyone who's going to the critical race theory, social justice warrior, they are falling into the Marxist Gramsci strategy of the Frankfurt School. Now, the Frankfurt School, for those who aren't aware of it, was the Marxists in Frankfurt, Germany, who in the 1920s and 30s were looking ahead and saying, we'll never be able to get as lucky as Lenin got in Russia in 1917. That was just a freak set of circumstances, First World War and everything else. We're not going to get this again. The only way we're going to get the West is to Marxize the inner man. The West is too Christian. We've got to get the West to think of all issues without regard or reference to God or the Bible or Jesus Christ. And we must get people in the West to not only think in a non-Christian way, but to begin to think in an anti-Christian way. We need to Marxize the inner man. And we do this through critical race theory and through social justice warrior. It's the Gramsci strategy, the termite strategy, where they rot out the central pillars of society: education, entertainment, news media, religious institutions, and ultimately the political institutions fall into their laps. That they said you can put as many coats of paint as you like over the house, but when the termites have eaten out the pillars, the whole house will collapse ultimately. And so it's not an accident that a culture is producing media that celebrates the ugly and the anti-Christian and the grotesque and the perverse. This is deliberate. They work on a strategy of corrupt and conquer, basically. And so, yes, there's no doubt. To me, the biggest battles we've got in the world today, it's communism versus Christianity. It's the godless globalist agenda versus faith and family and the future.
Very good. Dr. Hammond, thank you so much for your work. Where can people find you? And I wanted to say, too, I get your newsletters. You've got just incredible stuff that you send out on a regular basis. Tell people where they can find you on the web. Where's the best place to find your ministry? How do people sign up for your newsletters and all that? Just tell us the best way to find you.
Thank you. Our website, frontlinemissionsa.org. So it's frontline mission SA for South Africa.org. And our email is mission@frontline.org.za. mission@frontline.org.za. That's the email. And you can find us on social media too, on Facebook, Frontline Fellowship, and my personal email, peter@frontline.org.za.
Excellent. Dr. Hammond, thank you so much. Hopefully we can have you back on in the very near future. Folks, Dr. Hammond is a man who's involved in some incredible work. So I hope you've enjoyed this interview. I hope it's been a blessing to you. I hope you'll go check out his website. He is doing some really important work across Africa and around the world too. He comes to the United States and speaks regularly. If you get a chance to go hear him when he's in town or near you, definitely go do that. I'm Alex Newman again. This is The New American. Thank you very much for watching. God bless you, Dr. Hammond. God bless you folks out there. Appreciate you watching. And until next time, take good care.